So today, we're going on a deep dive into a King James Bible study titled Newness of Life, a study of spiritual transformation.
Which is such a fascinating document.
It really is.
Yeah.
And our mission for this deep dive is to explore exactly how this specific biblical framework argues that we can replace destructive habits with good ones, completely bypassing human willpower.
Okay, let's unpack this because it feels like our modern world is so obsessed with self-help, yet everyone is still burning out.
Yeah, they are. And we are unpacking texts here that carry immense historical and spiritual weight. I mean, we aren't looking at a superficial manual for behavior modification, or some quick 10-step life hacks.
Not at all.
We are examining profound ancient scriptures that address the absolute deepest psychological struggles of human weakness. And what makes this study so compelling is how it contrasts that inherent human weakness directly with what it describes as the overwhelming transformative power of God.
Right, it's a completely different paradigm.
Exactly. The text is making the argument that genuine change requires a completely different mechanism than just trying harder.
Which is honestly a relief. But before we can even look at the how of changing our habits, we really have to look at how this text explains the why behind human failure. The root cause.
Yeah. The study brings up the Apostle Paul's writings in the book of Romans, specifically chapter 7. And Paul expresses this incredibly visceral, raw frustration with himself.
He really lays it all out there.
He does. He writes, "For I know that in me, that is, in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me. But how to perform that which is good I find not."
It is a staggering admission when you consider the source.
Right, because of who he was.
Exactly. Paul wasn't just some casual observer. Historically, he was a Pharisee of Pharisees. I mean, he was a top-tier religious scholar who had dedicated his entire life to mastering the law and achieving behavioral perfection.
He was the ultimate self-help success story on paper.
On paper, yes.
Yeah.
Yet here he is, essentially saying, I have the desire to do what is right. The intention is definitely there. But the actual internal machinery required to pull it off, I literally cannot find it within my own human nature. And he goes on in that passage to describe a completely universal human experience. The good things he genuinely wants to do, he fails to do. And the destructive things he desperately wants to avoid.
Those are the exact things he ends up doing on repeat.
Exactly. The very things he hates, he does.
Okay, let's pause there because I want to push back slightly on behalf of the listener.
Sure.
In our modern context, being told that we have no good thing dwelling in our flesh and that we basically lack the internal machinery to direct our own steps, I mean, that sounds incredibly bleak.
It does sound harsh at first.
Yeah, it sounds like a recipe for total nihilism or just giving up on self-improvement entirely. Like, why even try?
What's fascinating here is that the initial reaction to that concept is almost always defensive because it offends our modern sensibilities. We want to be the captain of our own ship.
Oh, absolutely.
But the framework presented here isn't designed to crush the reader. It is structurally designed to liberate them from an impossible burden.
Liberate them. How so?
Well, think about the crushing psychological weight of pure self-reliance. If every single victory depends entirely on your fleshly strength and you inevitably keep failing, you get trapped in a brutal cycle.
Guilt, shame, and sheer exhaustion.
Right. The study actually connects Paul's frustration directly to the prophet Jeremiah. In Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9, the text makes this sweeping diagnostic claim.
Oh, I know this one.
Yeah, it says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" And then Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12 warns, "There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death."
Wait. The heart is deceitful above all things. I mean, that is the exact opposite of the core mantra of the 21st century.
Completely the opposite.
The modern mantra is literally just follow your heart. But the text is essentially arguing that relying on our own internal compass is dangerous because the compass itself is fundamentally broken.
That's a great way to put it.
It points to magnetic north, but magnetic north is a cliff.
That is the core tension right there. The text is systematically dismantling the illusion that humanity can save or fix itself through sheer determination.
It's taking away the broken compass.
Right. And Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 23 reinforces this by stating, "O Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps."
Oh.
The scriptures are attempting to remove the massive burden of self-direction. If your compass is broken, you have to stop looking at the compass and start looking for an external guide.
There is this analogy pulled directly from the text that perfectly illustrates this concept of inherent inability.
The one in Jeremiah.
Yes, Jeremiah chapter 13, verse 23.
Yeah.
Prophet asks, "Can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots? Then may ye also do good that are accustomed to do evil."
It's such a striking visual.
It really is. It establishes this idea that trying to change our fundamental accustomed nature through willpower is as biologically possible as a leopard trying to scrub the spots off its own fur with a loofah.
With a loofah. Right, you can until you're exhausted, but the spots are baked into the DNA.
Exactly.
And that analogy captures the entire biblical view of what it calls the flesh. The flesh, meaning our unaided human nature, cannot produce the life or the behavior that God requires.
It's just not capable of it.
Right. Romans chapter 8 lays out the conclusion plainly. So then they that are in the flesh cannot please God. And notice how the text repeatedly leans on the language of absolute mechanical inability.
Yeah, words like find not, could not, and cannot really dominate these passages.
The text even describes the carnal mind, which is the fleshly human way of thinking, as being at enmity, meaning at active war, with God. So it isn't just weak.
It is actively resistant.
Exactly.
So if human willpower is completely bankrupt and we literally can't scrub off our own leopard spots, what is the actual mechanism for transformation?
Right. Where do we go from here?
Because the text seems to make a hard pivot from human inability to a profound spiritual action. And this mechanism is detailed heavily in Ephesians chapter 4 and Colossians chapter 3.
The language makes a really fascinating shift here. It moves from diagnosing what we cannot do in our own strength to outlining what we are commanded to do in the power of the Spirit.
And the verbs are so active.
Very active, almost aggressive verbs to describe this process.
Yeah, the sequence of verbs in Ephesians chapter 4 is relentless.
Mm-hmm.
It tells the reader to walk not as other Gentiles walk, in the vanity or emptiness of their mind.
But it doesn't just leave a vacuum.
Right, it gives a specific remedy. It says to put off the former conversation, to be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and then to put on the new man.
And the text is highly forensic in detailing exactly what is being put off and put on. The old man, according to these verses, is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts.
So it's very specific about the corruption.
Yes. That putting off includes specific actions, like putting away lying, anger, stealing, corrupt communication, bitterness, wrath, and malice.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Paul describes this process almost exactly like a radical wardrobe change.
Oh, wardrobe change.
You are taking off this filthy, corrupt, rotting set of clothes, the old man, and you are putting on a pristine, brand new set of clothes, the new man.
Right.
And the text says this new man is created in righteousness and true holiness. So you took off the heavy coat of bitterness and you put on the garment of being kind and tenderhearted.
You swap lying for speaking the truth.
Exactly. But I have to imagine it's deeper than just swapping jackets. You can't just put a pristine white tuxedo over a muddy, stinking jogging suit and call yourself clean.
No, because the mud is going to seep through.
Exactly. The mud seeps through.
That is a crucial distinction. And to understand how the mud doesn't just seep through, we really have to ground this wardrobe metaphor in the theological weight of Romans chapter 6.
Okay, tell me about Romans 6.
The text is very clear that this isn't just faking it till you make it. It isn't playing dress up over an unchanged nature. Romans chapter 6 explains the profound spiritual reality behind this shift. The old man isn't just taken off and hung in the back of the closet to be worn again later.
Like an old winter coat.
Exactly. The text explicitly states, our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin.
Crucified. Wow. I mean, that is violent, permanent, terminal language.
It's completely terminal.
It implies that the previous version of you doesn't just need a makeover, it needs an execution.
The text literally frames it as a spiritual death and resurrection. It argues that the believer is baptized into Christ's death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, the believer also should walk in newness of life.
Oh, and that phrase is actually where the title of this study originates.
Yes, exactly. You aren't just sending the old man to therapy. The old man is legally and spiritually dead.
You are stepping into a completely new existential reality.
Right. The text commands the reader to yield yourselves unto God as those that are alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness unto God. The mechanism of change relies on the belief that you are fundamentally freed from being a servant to your old nature.
Okay, let's follow the logical progression here because we've established the framework's claim that the old man is crucified and we need to put on the new man to walk in newness of life.
Right.
But how does that actually play out on a Tuesday afternoon? You know,
Yeah.
knowing you need to put on a new nature is one thing, but where does the actual power to do this come from?
That is the big question.
Yeah, because if we already established in the first segment that our flesh is weak and bankrupt, how do we actually animate this new man?
To answer the how, the study points directly to the words of Christ in the Gospel of John, chapter 15.
Okay.
And this passage completely reorients the psychological approach to producing good habits or good works. It shifts the focus from manufacturing to attaching.
I love that. Manufacturing to attaching. Jesus uses a botanical metaphor there, right?
Yeah. He does. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. And then he gives this directive to his disciples. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine. No more can ye, except ye abide in me.
First, let's clarify that term, husbandman.
Sure, in modern English, we would say the viticulturist, the gardener, or the caretaker of the vineyard. God the Father is tending the vine.
Right.
But notice how the language of human inability returns in this metaphor. The branch cannot bear fruit of itself.
It's an incredibly definitive, almost stark statement. He says, for without me, ye can do nothing.
Nothing at all.
I look at that phrase, and to me, that is the ultimate profound antidote to modern burnout.
Absolutely.
If you are listening to this and you are exhausted trying to manufacture patience with your kids or trying to manufacture peace in a stressful job, this text is saying, of course you are exhausted.
Because a severed branch cannot squeeze grapes out of its own wood.
Exactly. You cannot produce the fruit of a good life unless you are connected to the source of life. You just have to abide.
Building on that concept of abiding, this botanical metaphor perfectly explains the internal friction Paul describes later in Galatians chapter 5.
Oh, the battle of the flesh and the spirit.
Yes, Paul outlines an intense, ongoing psychological and spiritual battle inside the believer. He writes, for the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary the one to the other.
Let's translate lusteth for a second, because today we almost exclusively use that word in a romantic or sexual context.
Very true.
But here it's describing a deep, almost gravitational pull, right? Like a strong magnetic desire pull you in the wrong direction.
Yes, it means an intense craving or a strong drive. The flesh is pulling one way and the spirit is pulling the exact opposite way.
A constant tug of war.
Exactly. But the real revelation in Galatians 5 is the textual difference in how Paul categorizes the outcomes of these two pulls.
How does he categorize them?
Well, when he describes the output of the flesh, he calls them the works of the flesh. These are things like adultery, hatred, wrath, strife, envying.
Works. That implies labor.
Heavy, fleshly labor. It is human nature manufacturing toxic output. But when he describes the output of the spirit, he completely changes the noun.
He doesn't call them works.
No, he calls them the fruit of the spirit.
Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance.
Exactly. And think about the biological reality of fruit. Fruit isn't manufactured on an assembly line with sweat and heavy machinery.
Right, you don't hear a tree grunting to push out an apple.
Exactly. It grows organically, almost silently, as a natural byproduct of a branch being healthy and abiding in the vine.
That makes so much sense.
The power to grow a grape doesn't come from the branch straining, flexing, and stressing out.
Huh?
The power comes entirely from the sap flowing upward from the vine through the branch and producing the fruit naturally.
If I can throw out an analogy here.
Please do.
Trying to produce good habits in your own fleshly strength is like taping grocery store apples to a dead branch in your backyard and trying to convince your neighbors you have a thriving orchard.
That is a perfect picture of it.
Right. It might look good from a distance for about 2 days, but eventually the tape gives out, the apples rot, and you're just left with a dead stick.
Yeah, you can't fake life.
This text argues that replacing bad habits isn't a checklist. It's a living connection.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text argues that the stakes of this connection are eternal. Galatians chapter 6 warns, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap."
Reaping what you sow.
Right. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting.
Wow.
The study also links this directly to John chapter 8, where Jesus tells the crowds that whoever commits sin is the servant or slave of sin. True freedom, according to this framework, doesn't come from a 10-step program of self-mastery. Jesus states, "If the Son therefore shall make you free, you shall be free indeed."
So we've traced the text's argument that we can't change ourselves, that the old nature must be considered dead so we can put on the new man, and that we must abide in Christ like a branch in a vine.
That's the progression.
But the final piece of this study zooms in on exactly how deeply, on a surgical level, God gets involved in this process. And the language in the Old Testament book of Ezekiel, chapter 36, is incredibly striking.
It really is. It is considered one of the most foundational promises regarding spiritual transformation in the entire biblical canon.
Because it describes a profound internal surgery.
He does.
The text quotes God speaking to the people, saying, "Then will I sprinkle clean water upon you, and ye shall be clean. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes."
Notice the relentless sequence of action verbs in that passage, and specifically notice who is performing them.
It's all God doing the work.
Exactly. I will sprinkle, I will give, I will take away, I will put my spirit within you, I will cause you. The text describes God performing a spiritual heart transplant.
Taking away the stony heart.
Right, which implies an organ that is cold, dead, and completely unresponsive to God, and replacing it with a heart of flesh, implying something living, beating, and responsive.
But that actually leads to a massive practical question.
Okay, what is it?
So what does this all mean for the listener? If it's all God doing the work, not by works of righteousness, which we have done, as Titus 3 says, do we just sit back and do nothing?
That is the classic pushback.
Are we just passive passengers in a self-driving car of spiritual transformation?
That is the ultimate tension point, and the scriptures actually balance this very carefully. The study brings in Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, to address the exact intersection of God's sovereignty and human responsibility.
How does Paul explain it there?
Well, he writes to the Philippians, "Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure."
Okay, so there is a command for the believer to work out the very thing that God is simultaneously working in.
Yes. The text argues that God is the one who worketh in you both to will and to do. Let's look at the psychology of desire there. God provides the new heart, which changes the will, your actual appetites and desires.
So suddenly the destructive habit that used to look appealing starts to look like poison.
Exactly. And the good habit you used to dread becomes something you genuinely desire. He changes the will, and he provides the spiritual sap, the power to do it.
The power of the vine.
You've got it. But that inward invisible renewal is exactly what empowers our outward visible conduct. When Ezekiel says God will cause you to walk in my statutes, statutes meaning his laws or ways, it means our outward actions.
Like how we speak to our spouses or our honesty at work.
Exactly. Our willingness to forgive a grudge, those actions are the evidence that the heart transplant was successful.
They are the evidence, not the purchase price.
Perfectly said. They are not the purchase price for the surgery.
It's the sequence that unlocks the whole thing.
The sequence is everything.
The study highlights this as an unbreakable pattern throughout the texts. Inward, divine renewal always comes before the resulting outward behavior. You do not force yourself to do good works in order to earn a new heart.
Because you can't.
Right. According to this text, God gives you a new heart, and therefore you organically begin to produce good works.
Returning to our earlier metaphor, you do not strain to bear fruit in order to convince the vine to adopt you as a branch.
That'd be ridiculous.
Right. You bear fruit effortlessly because you are already securely attached to the vine.
Wow.
The entire scriptural map we've traced today repeatedly places human behavioral change chronologically after God's spiritual action.
Christ makes you free.
Yes. The old man is crucified with him. The new man is created after God. God gives the new heart. Then, and only then, does the walk change.
It is an incredibly cohesive, unified argument across vastly different books of the Bible.
It really is.
From the ancient prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel to the direct words of Jesus in the Gospel of John, to the intense theological letters of Paul, the message remains consistent. Genuine lasting transformation is not achieved by white-knuckling your way through fleshly strength, but by receiving newness of life.
And this brings us full circle to the reality of the modern human condition.
The burnout we talked about at the start.
Exactly. The unaided flesh, no matter how many atomic habits it tries to build or how much self-help audio it consumes, will ultimately reap exhaustion and corruption.
It's inevitable.
But according to these scriptures, a life yielded to the Spirit, resting in the finished work of Christ, naturally and inevitably produces the fruit of the Spirit.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to summarize the deeply hopeful message this specific study offers you today.
It is incredibly hopeful.
If you are sitting there listening to this, commuting to work or walking the dog, and you are just exhausted from failing the same resolutions, exhausted from the endless grinding cycle of trying to engineer a better version of yourself,
We've all been there.
these King James scriptures offer a profound, heavy sigh of relief. This framework argues that true change does not come from your fleshly strength. It comes from receiving a completely new heart, abiding in the vine, and allowing God's Spirit to produce fruit through you.
You don't have to carry the crushing weight of being your own architect anymore.
Before we go, I know you had a final thought for the listeners.
I do. I want to leave you with a completely different angle to mull over, building on everything we've just unpacked.
What's the angle?
Well, we've talked extensively about how outward actions are just the organic fruit of whatever vine we are plugged into.
Right.
If that botanical mechanism is true, look at the staggering rates of anxiety, anger, and burnout in our culture today. What invisible vines is modern society currently plugged into?
Oh, that's a great question.
Whether it's the outrage cycle of social media, the relentless hustle culture, or the pressure of constant comparison, these vines are naturally producing a bitter, exhausted cultural fruit.
So true.
If you don't like the fruit your life is producing, it might be time to examine what vine you are currently abiding in.
That is an incredibly provocative thought to end on, and a perfect question for you to ask yourself this week. You can learn more about spiritual transformation and explore these concepts further by checking out the additional resources we have linked for you right down in the description.
There's some really great stuff in there.
Definitely.
So,
And lastly, I want to remind you that every single week we will deep dive into the questions you have about the Bible and explore exactly how to apply these ancient, powerful teachings to our complex, everyday lives.
it's always a great conversation.
It is a journey of discovery you definitely don't want to miss. We will see you next time.